let me know what it is on Slack or something. That'd be great as well.
You got it.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another SIG cluster lifecycle. Looks like we have quite a lot of stuff on the agenda today. So should we start with Derek McQuay?
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of jump into the testing for kubeadmin. It's been kind of my responsibility. I've been doing some stuff on it, but I've kind of been stuck when it comes to continuing the process for integration tests and end-to-end tests. So I created that Google Doc that's linked there in the agenda. I'd really appreciate it if people could read it, if we could discuss maybe a little bit of it now. But just for people to give some comments, because as it stands right now, I feel a little overwhelmed with the options that I presented in the document, but also just what's been going around. I know that there's been a lot of work that was put into getting Kube Anywhere and HackE2E.go to build clusters using kubeadmin, and that was one form of verifying that kubeadmin had some sort of tests, and we were ensuring that it was correctly building clusters. But I know that this is something that was a requirement for it moving to beta, and I know that's a push that we're all trying to do, and I just kind of want to do my part and help getting these tests to a healthy place.
Cool. Well, thank you, Derek. I mean, this is really important work, and I'm just looking at your doc for the first time. Are you currently the work that Mirantis did on the Docker and Docker stuff, is that of any use to this effort?
I didn't bring that up at all, right? Someone could comment on that and we could do something. But I was approaching on, I've been working on a PR. Lucas has actually been reviewing it, and we've been kind of iterating back and forth. There were some tests that Jacob Beecham wrote that I actually really liked. He was taking, you'll see it later down in the code. It was taking how we do the make, test commands, and he wrote a thing that would do it in Go instead of Bash, and it was calling out. And we're just having this argument about where it should be, where it should live, and all of these things in conjunction. Just some clarification that as a SIG we can decide, no, this is what we're doing. These are where these tests are going to be, and kind of just come to some clarity. So I'm more than happy to work on writing the end-to-end tests and doing these things. I'll need help because I don't know how to do it all, especially the end-to-end stuff. I've never done anything with like Jingo and all those other stuff. So I would be happy to do it. I just want some direction, and it seems that like it's been kind of stuck for quite a while, and kind of wanted to push it through. So.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. So is anyone who has been involved in those discussions here on the call today? Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Should I start, or do you have some? Curious? Yeah. Okay. After thinking a little bit more about it, I wouldn't put it as a, well, now we have it as a unit test. So if we have a file foo.go, we have foo and test go. But I think what it really is an E2E test, because we're basically execing the binary somewhere. It's a pre-built kubeadmin binary. We're execing that, trying to make sure that, for example, kubeadmin token generate returns 0. Kubeadmin token generate, I think, with a typo should return 1 or something, and such other kubeadmin specific things that only are tied to our binary. I think it should live somewhere, maybe as SIG node did with the E2E node test or something. I don't know, we could package it as a binary or whatever, but a binary that could be written in Go that takes a path to a pre-built kubeadmin binary and then just runs some tests, but some exec tests on it.
So I know that the person who authored that was Jacob here. He's in the call. I don't know if he wants to talk to it, but it was from talking to him, I know that there was this idea that these were command tests, right? Like they were. I can't remember exactly how he delineated it, but basically that they were a special subset, and that was something that was up for discussion, right? And something that I talked about in the document that I thought most people, would agree with is I really liked his approach because he was writing something in Go instead of using Bash. And I thought that was awesome, and I think that's how we should continue. Everything that we can write in Go instead of Bash, I almost would agree with. And that's what he did. And so I think if everyone looks at that PR, you can kind of see some of the work that I was working on it, but you'll see his initial thing. I think in the comments, oh, by the way, I sent it in the chat, the PR that Lucas was talking about. But people want to check it out. It's kind of an interesting, command, but there's some issues with it that I ran into. For example, I was writing some integration tests for kubeadmin init. And init, when it does all its stuff, it then polls infinitely, waiting for the control plane to get ready. So that was a problem with how we were doing it. Now, there are solutions around it, right? You can write a timeout, you could do whatever, right? But these were some of the concerns that were brought up in doing tests this way that Jacob had kind of set up. Although I think it's the right direction. So.
Yeah. So I totally think it should be written in Go. All of our tests for kubeadmin instead of Bash. And I'm currently working on trying to refactor stuff, and the end goal is beta, of course, and with the API. But well, I have a point later in the agenda that's about what we should call our individual phase commands, right? When we just want to invoke one phase that has a clearly stated set of inputs and outputs, those are the important ones to be E2E tested or integration tested, whatever we call it. Anyway, for example, if we have a certificates phase, we should E2E test that if no certificate exists, it should generate these 3 files. And if one of them exists, it should only generate 2, and so on. So it's the same thing. And E2E testing the full kubeadm init is, at least in my opinion, a different thing than testing small subsets of functionality in the kubeadm packages, right?
Are there any E2E tests at present?
Sorry,
I was just asking if there are end-to-end tests that exist at this
Currently, no.
So we don't have any kubeadmin specific end-to-end tests. What we do is very similar to what COPS does now, which is we have an ability to deploy a cluster actually in GCE using kubeadmin to completely initialize it. And then once the cluster is up, then we run our standard suite of conformance tests against it, which are the end-to-end tests that should be able to run against any Kubernetes cluster. And then we can tear it back down. We do that all end-to-end. What I think Derek's talking about, what we would like to do is there are a lot of scenarios specific to kubeadmin that we would like to add more testing around that don't apply to any other cluster. And one point of contention is how should they be written? Where should the test live? And I think part of that that I want to kind of take the pulse on the community is how close are we to actually moving to our own repo? Because I think that changes a lot of things. And the other one is maybe what sorts of tests do we need? How much test coverage do we need aside from just the standard conformance tests?
So I think what Jacob just described is end-to-end testing, right? Someone asked if we had end-to-end testing, and the answer is yes. Like we have end-to-end testing in the same way COPS does. We run the standard end-to-end tests against kubeadmin clusters, right? That is end-to-end testing at kubeadmin. What we don't have is the testing of the phases.
And one thing I would just want to add to that, I totally agree. That is a form of testing kubeadmin. But I think what also is lacking is that shows up in kubeadmin PRs, right? Like a kubeadmin PR shouldn't move beyond if that test fails, right? So I know that I was back in November, I was talking with Jacob about this, and he had been doing tons of work on it. And I know that it's an awesome test to have. I would just love to see that show up on people's PRs. Like, oh no, you actually broke kubeadmin. This should not be merged, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
actually, sorry.
Go ahead,
When I tied everything together, I actually put it as a Jenkins job and had just endless trouble talking with our Enterprise team to actually get it working. So I was rewriting it as a Prow job, which is their newest tool that would allow you to block PRs based on it. I kind of backburnered it recently to work on some other stuff, but I can definitely see that through and actually have it block PRs, a successful run of our end-to-end tests.
Yeah, I would very much like to see that as well. That would be really cool. As a side note, I talked to the testing team and they've made a filter. I don't know if you have heard of it, but they have a filter that enables optional jobs, right? So if a PR touches a specific, some specific files with a regex, it's going to run and it's going to be required. Otherwise, it's just going to be ignored. So we should use that.
Yeah, that'd be perfect, because then we can have it say like anybody who changes the Discovery API or the Certificates API or kubeadmin code, which eventually will be moved out into a separate repo, we should run our test against it, which is exactly what Derek was asking for.
However, changes outside of kubeadmin's directories can affect kubeadmin's ability to deploy clusters.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we could figure out which changes could affect us and not run it on every PR. But clearly running on every PR is a safe way to do it to start.
Okay, great. Should we move on to the next topic on the agenda then?
Yeah, well, I would just say, I know a lot of people are probably just looking at Derek's doc for the first time. For those that are actually interested in it, I would say, give it a more thorough read, and maybe next time we could try to come to a conclusion or have a more fruitful discussion than just everyone quickly glancing through and not really fully grokking the contents of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call. I was also going to say, Derek, do you feel like you got what you needed out of this conversation, or do you think there's more conversation needed?
I totally think it got started. I'm happy to see that it's moving in the right direction. I still think, particularly with integration tests, there needs to be more of a discussion. And maybe what needs to happen, I agree with Jacob. People need to look at the doc, look at the PRs, look what happened, look at the discussion, understand where we're coming from. And the end-to-end test stuff, like I said, I'm more than happy to push this through. I will need help though. I haven't done this stuff before, and I will ping the correct people for help. And then I think once we get that piping in the back for the work of Kube Anywhere, bringing up clusters that can show up on PRs, I think those are all very good things. But I think that's an awesome idea by Jacob. Let's review the doc, and I'll bring this up again next week, and we can kind of finalize it.
Okay, great. And it might also help if you send the doc out to the mailing list if you haven't already. That is a good way to get more eyes on it. And there's also the possibility that we could spin off a separate meeting for people who want to have a deep dive on testing if necessary. Do you want to do that this week, or are you okay waiting until next week so everyone's got a chance to read the doc?
I think waiting is probably a good idea because we can get more feedback, and then we can do the separate meeting.
Okay. Hopefully we won't need it, but we might, and then we can do that. So I'm always loath to suggest extra meetings, but it's worth sometimes just hammering out a topic. So that's great. Okay, cool. I will put that on the agenda for next meeting. Is Pierce in the room?
Yes. Hello.
Hey, how's it going? You've got a couple of items here, so I'll let you take those.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, this is I know this is a soft spot, but nowadays there's been very little people working on KubeADM, particularly reviewing stuff. And Lucas has been putting out a lot of code, and it's been somewhat hard to review. I've had this conversation with him. I just wanted to add this to the conversation. I don't want to take too much time, but I think, or I believe it's important for us to, as we get closer to KubeADM, beta, graduation, all of that, to have in mind that we need to review stuff, and huge PRs do not help at all. Moving code from place to place, refactoring, redesigning, whatever you want to call it, doesn't help either, particularly for people that are jumping in and are trying to contribute. Because even people that have been working on this for the past, 2 releases, since this was just released in 1.4, it's not been easy, even for me sometimes. So I wanted to bring that up and hear what you guys think about it.
This is a general theme across the project, though, right? Like, as we mature as a project, having commits have a certain shape and being atomic, as with regards to a feature, is what we should try to strive to do. There are many PRs that go in still upstream in the main repository outside of KubeADM that are just these massive monolith feature PRs that touch so many aspects. In general, we should try to strive to break down the pieces just so it's tenable for reviewers. I know myself, in reviewing some PRs, I literally have to spend days trying to beautiful mine the sucker back together because it touches so many different areas.
Yeah, I agree. Personally, I've had one huge bug introduced into KubeADM because I failed to review it properly before. I didn't want that to happen, so close to what we hope will be a better release, but I understand that it is transversal to the entire project. But most people are here today, at least most of the contributors I recognize. So if we could all agree that we will pay more attention in the future. And yes, Tim, definitely we need more tests. And actually, sometimes we are removing them, the ones that exist. So it doesn't help either.
It would be great if there was a quick way to view kubeadmin PRs. I don't think that's really possible today. Maybe if people with label access could label kubeadmin PRs with the component kubeadmin label, we could keep track and start to collect numbers on PRs that are not getting enough attention.
For people who they submit a PR, is it enough to just tag it with there's a group and you can just search for that group? I'm just labeling is fine and all, but if not everybody has the ability to label, then it's you have to get somebody to go and label it before people can find it.
Maybe that's something that we could ask the EngProd team to add a Kata spot command for, to add a component label.
Sounds good. Michael, thank you. Could you please mute? Thank you. Okay, so that's good. That's fine. So I think that message has been heard loud and clear. Just sort of funny sort of anecdote. I heard someone describe that writing code is sort of order n with respect to the number of lines you write, but reviewing it is order n squared. So it's definitely worth bearing that in mind. Lucas, did you have something you wanted to add there? Had your hand up.
I don't know anything specific really, but yeah, we need both more reviewers and more coders. I think it has been quite little activity generally. So if we had some way to kind of ping people and find reviewers more easily, it would be great. Yeah, but I find kubeadm PRs by just searching for kubeadm in the search box, but I don't know.
Seems reasonable. Does anyone here manage an engineering team who has spare capacity? I just thought I'd try. Okay, never mind.
I didn't catch that, Luke. What did you ask?
Does anyone here manage an engineering team who has spare capacity? Because Lucas was saying we need more programmers.
I'll see what we can do.
Okay, cool.
It'll take time. We got to hire people, but send them our way.
Okay. All right. So if anyone has got capacity to work on stuff, then please show up on Slack and say, how can I help? That would be really, really helpful. Thank you. Okay, so Lucas, do you want to take us through the phases that kubeadmin has? Is that what you had in mind for this section? Are you trying to validate with the group here that these are the correct phases?
Yeah, I guess so. I've been trying to fit that into some meetings here lately, but we haven't had time for it. So maybe today is a good day to do it.
Well, we're only 24 minutes in, so we can have a go.
Yeah. First off, we have the certificates phase. It generates 3 cert and key pairs. First, the CA, the API server cert, and the API server kubelet client cert. The kubelet client cert is used for, it has basically got the system masters. It's in the system masters group or organization. So the kubelets will authorize only those certs that has got that organization as a security feature. Right now, if I understood it correctly, with kubeadm 1.5, anyone could, because anonymous auth is turned on and we don't have any authorizers, so anyone can exec any pod in the cluster, which is a security nightmare, right? So this, I talked to Legit and David Eads and some other SIG auth guys, and well, they said this route is a good one. So basically, we're generating client certs for the API server from the CA cert, assigning them those client certs a specific group, and then kubelet will use an API called something subject access review or something, and it will authorize only those who are in the system masters or admin groups.
So Lucas, there are 2 ways to do that. One is to keep everybody under the same CA, and the other one is to have 2 separate CAs, one for the master side and the other for the node side. It sounds like you're going with the former and having a single CA for everybody. Is that right?
Yeah. There's 2 ways to do it, and they said that was a route that we could take, and I think it's a good one. I don't know if the rest of the folks agree, but anyway.
I think it just forces RBAC, right? So we won't be able to support secure clusters with other authorization plugins. Is the limitation of that approach?
I don't think so, because it wasn't an RBAC API. Instead, it was the subject access review API that the kubelet.
Sure, but that ties into RBAC roles, right? So the subject access review expands. Let me remind myself. Subject access review attaches the request to a role, and then you define an RBAC role for that specific group. I'm pretty sure that this doesn't work without RBAC enabled.
We could try. I don't know.
Certainly.
Okay. Then the next step for kubeadm is to generate kube configs. It creates a client cert for the admin, the file admin, etc kubernetes admin conf. The client cert is in the system masters group, and yeah, that cert is embedded into the kube config file. Then it creates a kubelet kube config file with a client cert in the system nodes group, and that's basically it. In the future, we should consider at least to use a TLS bootstrapped client cert, but I don't know actually if it makes sense. But what do you think?
What was the question?
If it makes sense in the future to do the TLS bootstrap for the kubelet on the master, or not. Or if kubeadm
have the kubelet actually have a unique cert with the master? Yeah, we're going to want to do that, especially as we look towards HA.
The reason we haven't done it yet is because it requires some changes in kubelet to support. Yeah. Kubelet does not start its static pod sync loop until it would require either reconfiguring the kubelet or changing the order that kubelet starts its static pod reconcile loop.
Yeah. Then we have the discovery on the master side. One question here is if the user wants to join nodes with the file or HTTPS way, kubeadm, I think at least kubeadm should have an option to automatically generate that bootstrap kube config file. This isn't implemented yet, but anyway, if we do that, should we authorize the API server with a token or a client cert? What's the best way of doing it? I mean, we use a token for the token discovery, obviously. So if we use a token for the file and HTTPS discovery as well as the authorization method, we could reuse that code.
That's what we were planning on doing in KubeUp, and in GKE, we were just going to use a token auth for the CSR user, the user that is only capable of posting and reading CSRs.
Yeah. If we have RBAC enabled, that ties into the right group. Okay. Then we have to bring up the control plane. First off, we bring up etcd as a static pod, if the user said so. Then we're generating the arguments for API server and controller manager, and the volumes that those containers should have. And the primary output of this phase is the JSON files. Actually, we have JSON right now. Maybe we should generate YAML files. I think it's much cleaner, but as it stands, it's JSON files. Then we wait for the API server to come up and get a lot of errors, which we're trying to minimize with pre-flight checks. But anyway, sometimes they doesn't catch a faulty state, so we have to this wait for the API server thing isn't transparent to the user, but it's also hard because we can't like show Docker PS stats or something, because we should be container runtime independent. So I don't think we can do much else either. Then the master is labeled with a label that's a bit controversial, it seems. At least there has been a lot of discussion, because it's an official or unofficial API that we're dealing with. So at least there has been many comments on it. I don't think there's any conclusion which label that should be used yet. But anyway, linked to that thread. I don't know if I remember incorrectly or not, but I think I heard David or someone else from SIG scheduling that the dedicated taint is going to be used for other purposes. Tim, do you know, for example?
We do taint master nodes. It's not, we just mark as no schedule, no admit for some of the stuff that we do. But I don't exactly know how it's done for other folks. I'd have to dig.
We just set, Mike, go on.
In KubeUp, there's a taint on the master node called isMaster, and it is a no schedule taint as well.
Should we go with that one then? Instead of the dedicated taint, use the isMaster. Right now we have dedicated and no schedule.
There is an issue open for us to change that, and I don't think that we should do that forever. Yes, we should definitely change it.
And to what?
Either isMaster or whatever anybody else is using. I think dedicated people intend that to be reserved for when dedicated nodes is actually designed.
Yeah.
So there's this issue, and I can dig it up if you folks haven't seen it, talking about like labels for master and node roles. And there's some labels that kubeadmin's using. There's other labels, and the way that these things are structured imply at least that you can either be master or node, worker node, but not both. So that's related to this. I mean, maybe there's a way to sort of rationalize all this stuff together, but there's been some pushback in terms of moving that stuff forward, even though, as far as I can tell, nobody's actually using those labels.
That's the pull request that is linked to right here in the notes.
I linked it, yeah. Anyway, the only one who's using the kubeadm master label is kubeadm 1.4 and 1.5. So I think we could definitely break that before going to beta into something, for example, like what Phillips proposed, or anything else we agree on as a group. Okay. Then if the control plane deployment mechanism is self-hosting, we basically take the arguments and volume mounts that for controller manager and the API server and injects them into daemon sets for API server and deployments for controller manager and scheduler. Then we have a file lock like how CoreOS did it in Bootkube, which prevents some issues that they were facing otherwise.
Yeah,
Next.
I would just like to add that we're using that not just for the API server, but basically for the controller and the scheduler. And the problem is, I'm sure people here recall last week on Slack channel, we were talking about there's a need for the pod network to be in place for self-host components to be up. As a first pass, we've decided to go with the host network. So the first, at least the initial components that are self-host will be on the host network. And with kubeadm, that's how it's working right now. So we needed to use this file lock thing to start the components only after actually to run, but then remove the static pod only when the other ones are working. So the file lock is there for that.
Yeah. And
we didn't want to have the pod network requirement. Sorry, Lucas. But for instance, Bootkube as we don't have it. We don't force people to have a pod network in place to use at least the control plane.
And I think that's great that we don't enforce it, at least not in that phase. Then temporarily we're creating the kube discovery deployment, which is deprecated, and I think we're all excited. We're all waiting for Joe Beta's stuff.
Again.
Today, actually, I'm finally digging out. Today. My plan is to actually turn the crank on that thing finally. So I got the first draft of the book in, so that was the thing that was hanging over my head. I apologize. I feel incredibly guilty over this. I'm gonna make it up. So
cool.
Thanks.
And we have the dash controller flag, which was the technical debt issue, which caused the delay. That's already merged, so I think it should be a rebase and then kind of good to go. Then the next phase is configuring the API. I don't know if anyone has better naming suggestion. Feel free to say it. Anyway, what we're doing now is we're checking if authorization mode is RBAC and set some rules for TLS bootstrap. For example, we don't want the bootstrap someone with the bootstrap token to be able to exit into pods, for example. That token should be limited to only getting nodes and CSRs and that might be it. I don't remember for now. Then sets a policy for Kubernetes and kubeproxy. Then we have some future and proposed things that's up to discussion. First thing that I think we agreed on that should be done in the in-person meeting was that there should be an option to actually apply the CNI network provider file. So kubeadm would, for example, take a CNI network plugin flag or -- network or something.
Yes.
Thoughts?
So I just like to advocate for this being the default, because I think it's very rare you're going to find people who are new to kubeadm trying to deploy a cluster and then realizing at the end, oh, things don't work. Because people don't always read the docs. I know they should, but they don't. So if at least it was mandatory, giving me a CNI YAML to apply, they could always say, explicitly, I don't want to do anything, and that would be, useful for a certain class of people. But I think that's a small group. Now the only catch is once we start applying it, then integration issues come up. Like, oh, we want a template rather than just a static file, so we can have the user give configuration. We can share it between kubeadm and whatever CNI provider. But I mean, even if it was just here, take this static file, I think that would be a good first step.
Yeah, I think if it just took the same rules that kubectl apply takes, which is that you can pass a URL or a file, like a local file, that probably gives the user flexibility. I also just wanted to shout out, I just dropped a link in the agenda, in the minutes for this. Ilya put up a pull request against the docs. It's pull request 2389 against kubernetes.github.io. To improve the user experience for people choosing a network in the guide, in the kubeadmin guide. Because previously it said install a network add-on and didn't tell you how to do that. Apart from there was a link to a page that had links to a page that had links to pages that tell you how to do that. So we're proposing that there's just a simple drop-down box that uses a little bit of JavaScript to show the user a kubectl apply command for some popular networks. At the moment, Calico, Flannel, and WeaveNet are on the list. So that should help for the users who read the docs and should make the docs better. But I still think that, so please take a look at the PR and add any comments on it. But I also think it's reasonable and sane to have a -- network argument to kubeadmin.
So another way of approaching this, and I think this may be in addition to -- network, is that we could have some way to provide kubeadmin with a set of instructions of add-ons or things to do after the cluster, or at least the master, is up and running. And so network would be one of those. Other add-ons like the UI could be one of those. And we could have a way where there's sort of a standard set of add-ons, but then you could also pass in some sort of manifest file of other manifests for the thing to load and actually launch, right? Because I think, networking is not going to be the end of it. We don't want to add a gazillion flags. Networking's special, don't get me wrong. But I think that this is going to be a general sort of okay, now you have a minimal cluster. How do you get it up to full strength type of thing? And that might be the right extension point there.
Cool, that seems reasonable. I think that's, I noticed Lucas is adding comment to his next section, so I guess we'll come to that.
Yeah, now when it was mentioned, I saw that I had forgot that, to write that down. I think networking is, well, we have to pass two values. Or three. We discussed this last meeting, and it's, well, the file, the YAML file or JSON or whatever, to the daemon set, and kubeproxy also needs to know the pod network subnet, and as a last thing, we have to decide whether we want to enable the controller manager's subnet allocation feature by default or not.
Isn't that plugin specific though? Why would that be by default?
Yeah, we talked about that because the user doesn't know if he wants to enable this feature or not. And it doesn't hurt, for example, Weave, if it's enabled, because it's just, it just assigns some.
It doesn't assign actually. It just decides on podnet for a certain host, and it just tells the API server about it, but the current CNI implementation just ignore it. That should be fine. I guess we're in between this thing becoming a feature and CNI plugins adopting it, but I believe it's going to be the solution in the future. For now, I guess we can just make it work even with both things, but it can become complex to the user. Oh, I've set my pod CIDR in the API, and now what I'm getting is different.
I mean, I don't know. I guess if it's just harmless, then no danger. I don't think that there's going to be this isn't a generally required feature for CNI plugins. Just because some use it doesn't mean others do. Pretty sure Calico doesn't use it, for example. And I guess my suggestion would be is this just raises the fact that there's going to have to be tighter integration in the configuration, the networking, and what KubeADM does. And the static manifest is fine for now. But I can imagine there being like, you have a manifest that, A is templated and B has certain requirements that, would tell KubeADM to enable this feature, enable that feature. I'm not saying this is something we tackle now because it just becomes a rat hole, but like I can imagine this being not just for networking and having to be a lot more dynamic.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be cases where you have to thread things down for other things we want to be able to enable. But I mean, for now, the flag is harmless. Not having it enabled by default in our static manifests is hurting people who try and use Flannel, as far as I know. So let's just fix it. I mean, let's just always set it.
Yeah, exactly. And as Pires pointed out, both Flannel and Calico and Canal, I think, are moving to this approach. So, and as far as I understand, KubeNet is also using this feature and is slowly trying to move to being fully CNI based.
Is KubeNet continuing? For some reason, I thought that was going to die.
Sorry.
Isn't that like the existing implementation?
KubeNet is for GC and AWS.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
KubeNet may go away and become it's basically the CNI bridge plugin.
Yeah.
But there are some features in CNI that the CNI tool does not expose, like being able to check the status of the network configuration that are not supported in CNI yet. So that's why KubeNet exists.
Exactly. That's kind of the most production-ready method.
Maybe someday those will be CNI first class API entry points, but until that happens, I think KubeNet will exist.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out though that Flannel, I think someone would be crazy to run Flannel at scale. I guess for tiny things, it doesn't matter. And Canal is basically just Flannel plus Calico filtering. So we're saying like, hey, there's a bunch of things that require this. Really, it's only Flannel.
Okay, so then, well, we might want to decide that in the API configuration phase, we have a path to a manifest, a path or a URL to a CNI network provider. Then we also have the kubelet dynamic configuration proposal, and which makes it possible to set a config map with some sane defaults for all kubelets in the cluster to pick up. So configuration can flow down from KubeADM init to, well, kubelets. So that's one thing I guess we want to have there. Then in the future, we have the new cloud controller manager, cloud provider stuff. And I guess also that the tokens with Joe's new flow are gonna be configured here, right? So, for example, if the user passed -- token to KubeADM init, it will be set in the API with the new flow here, right? to actually create the secret in the config map. Joe.
Okay, I'm sorry. So repeat that. So yes, we'll have to bring up the API server long enough that you can actually go ahead and create the secret. You write that in there, and then you create the config map, and then the signer will go ahead and use that secret to sign the config map.
Yeah. So that's going to happen in this phase.
Yeah. So, but we'll also be able to, add other tokens and remove tokens, and we can use RBAC to control who can actually set those tokens. And then eventually, and this is probably going to have to be another change, damn it, is that we're going to want to have a authorization plugin that actually doesn't just use the tokens from the CSV file, but actually use the tokens that are in secrets also. And then we can key the TLS stuff off of that. And then we can get rid of that CSV file altogether. And those tokens that can be managed dynamically will be the only thing so that's sort of the other step from this. I'm sorry, it's not done. It should be done.
Actually, I mentioned that above, that the CSV file should ideally be an API object or the like, not a file that should exist on disk.
So the idea is that kill that CSV file, move that stuff into secrets. It's a little bit of a half-ass sort of, like it's not another full resource. It's not a third-party resource, but we're sort of using secrets in that way to kind of a little bit be a resource. But since this is bootstrap stuff and most users won't use this at runtime, it's probably okay. We really don't want a lot of the first-class treatment around this stuff. It's a little bit of an implementation detail.
Yeah, exactly. It could be implemented otherwise as well.
Yeah.
And then one thing I got to think about, do you want to, in this phase, have a exec action command or something? So the user could write his config file for kubeadm and write an absolute path or an HTTP post, something, or whatever, I don't know, which kubeadm would exec in this phase, or should we just ignore it and let the user do things after all phases are done? What do you think?
Why at the end of this phase specifically? It seems like if you were going to do this sort of functionality, you'd do like pre and post on almost like every phase. Is there something specific you have in mind for this particular part in the flow?
I was more thinking about if you decide to do the full kubeadm init and you want to exec, in this phase, we're configuring the API, right? So if you want to have a hook here before, for example, the add-ons are deployed, I don't know if, let's say you want to set some specific config maps, or you have to add something in the API that's required for the add-ons. I don't know.
I think if the user wants to do something special, then they can just run each of the phases independently and inject their special phase in at the right time.
Yeah, and alternatively, you could say kubeadmin init -- no add-ons, and it would run through all the phases until the end of this one. Then you do your special stuff, and then you just run the add-on phase, right? Like you could basically do what Luke was saying, but have it automate all the phases up to this point pretty easily.
Joe's muted.
Yeah.
So do we have an option to essentially say dry run, show me the phases that you would run, so that way people can sort of and maybe even make that be something that you can copy and paste into a bash script if you want to, and then you can sort of add your own stuff in there, right?
That's the goal with the refactoring thing I'm working on. Yeah. So yeah, it was just an idea that sprang to mind. It's totally fine to use this approach. And Tim asked here, I've implemented that for the first two phases. For example, if you already have the CA cert and key pair, kubeadm will just validate that this is a valid CA somehow, that that it hasn't expired and it can read it and so on. And it will just continue and use that file to sign API server certs and API server kubelet client cert and so on. So it will check if the files already exist, and if they exist, it will check, is this somehow valid state? And if it is, it will continue. If it's not, it will error out. The same goes for kubeconfig. If it sees admin conf file, for example, already on disk, it will do some checks that, well, we have the same CA cert, we have the expected master endpoint, etc. And if all those checks are passing, it will continue. So that's a general theme that I'm trying to gradually implement. And the same goes for the control plane phase. For example, when using static pods, the net outcome of a static pod control plane boot up is like 5 files. So if those 5 files already exist and they are valid, they have at least nearly the same content or exactly the same content, it's good to go and just continue. So that's the general idea of this kind of phases thinking. And clearly, we're trying to clearly define inputs and outputs for every logical phase. And then, for example, Derek and, oh, yeah, time's up.
Yeah, so time's up. So sorry, out of respect for everyone's time, I think we should knock this on the head. But thank you everyone for attending. Lucas, that was a really useful summary of the phases, and yeah, it sounds like this is going in a good direction. So thanks everyone.
More people are needed.
Yes, come and help out. Join our Slack channel and write some code, review some PRs. Okay, thanks everyone. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good one, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye, guys. Have a good one.